Anwen woke to low light and silk under her fingers. Soft cushions pressed against her back, leaving her feeling as though she floated on a cloud. Unlike before when she'd opened her eyes last, she felt no discomfort, nor did her vision betray her. She rolled to one side, feeling a stone lip announce the edge of the bed. Someone had left a faintly glowing orb, like some kind of night light. It hovered off to one side where an empty padded chair sat. Blinking, Anwen saw a faint outline of red and orange energy coming from the chair. When she reached out a hand, she could feel the warmth coming from it. Someone had sat there recently. Was it Tyler? No. She remembered his energy looked different. Hadn't it been red and gold in color? She closed her eyes and saw a long stream of revenants, like ants on the march. Anwen shook her head to clear the image. The disjointed creatures were nothing short of nightmare-inducing. It was the last thing she wanted to think about.
You're awake,
Courtney observed as she entered the chamber. She had to push past a curtain as she carried a small tray, struggling a bit to not let it slip from her grasp.
Wasn't sure earlier. You've been out for a while, you know. Even though you did call out in your sleep a few times.
Anwen moved to sit up, realizing her bed was more like a nest, filled with pillows than an actual bed.
Don't tell me.
She groaned.
It's been 5 days, right?
She couldn't help but recall the time she'd gotten a concussion on the sacred island. She'd been out for quite a while after that as well. Her friend shook her head with a smile.
More like 2.
She set the tray down on the stone shelf next to the nest of blankets.
Tyler said you needed a bit of a recharge.
But Kaida resisted the urge to roll her eyes. It left her feeling dizzy if she moved too fast. She could still see the vestiges of the spiritual energy out of the corner of her eye. Tyler had told her it would be like that sometimes. She might see residual energy long after the individual had moved away. Courtney's trailed out like peach blossoms. Courtney fussed over the tray for a moment before bringing it over to her friend.
There's some porridge if you like, and I really do recommend the bread. Tastes like honey but melts on your tongue like butter.
Accepting the tray, Anwen couldn't help but breathe in the tantalizing smells coming from it.
I'm always such a mess.
She commented as she picked up a piece of bread.
It seems like every time something bad happens, it happens to me. I'm getting rather tired of that.
The fledgling mage let out a snort.
Aren't we all? Don't forget, though, you're not the only one who's been through the mill.
She settled on the chair nearest her friend, making sure she ate more than just the bread. Tyler had instructed her to keep an eye on their mutual friend. Salvia divinum had the tendency to make a person's appetite disappear. It was not one of the more desirable side effects. Anwen waved an errant hand.
I know. I'm just one person in a vast world. It just feels like it's out to get me, even though I know I'm not the only one.
The ring on her finger lit up with intense green light as the light flashed off it. Courtney couldn't help but look at the gleaming gem.
Anwen, when did your mother give you that? I thought she had it with her when she died.
Pulling her hand back, Anwen looked at the ring. The dragon crest on the emerald jewel shimmered.
Before we reached the gates,
she replied.
She told me it's called the Mage Ring.
The Mage Ring?
Courtney's mouth fell open.
I once heard it holds the power of all those who ever held the title of Kaida. In essence, every Kaida ever lives on through that ring. Anwen, your mother is part of it too. Don't you see? Even though she's dead, she's not truly gone.
Anwen looked between the ring and her friend. This was something she'd never heard before, but it made some sort of sense. After all, she had seen her mother's corporeal form turn to energy and get sucked up into the jewel. A tear leaked from the corner of her eye, a small smile creasing her face. Maybe she hadn't lost her after all. Walter woke with a start. For the smallest of moments he couldn't move. Blinking, he glanced at the old-fashioned alarm clock. The numbers swam and then came into focus. 7:20. He closed his eyes with a sigh. Doubtless he'd just dozed off. But re-evaluating the amount of light coming in from the window, the medic sat bolt upright. Birds chirped outside. He'd slept far longer than planned. Doc had been right about him needing rest. With a groan, he moved to stand.
That was some dream. Must have been caused from extreme exhaustion.
At least it hadn't been about past battles, as he'd feared would happen. The purple-grained jewelry box caught his eye as he swung his feet to the floor. It was on the nightstand where he'd left it the day before. The brief image of a little girl with red hair giving him the box filled his mind.
Okay. Not a dream.
He sighed. Despite the rest, Walter's legs were shaky with fatigue. He'd definitely been pushing himself too hard lately. He stumbled as he moved towards the window. Catching himself on the nightstand, the jewelry box fell to the ground with an audible crack.
Crap!
Walter uttered as he bent to retrieve the upside-down box. Its hinges strained in protest. The velvet insert fell from inside as he picked up the object. A folded piece of parchment fell. The two pieces of wood had sandwiched it in place until now. Putting the broken box aside, Walter picked up the yellowing paper. It crackled but didn't break.
Hello?
He said as he felt the hand-pulped paper.
What's this?
Using extreme care, he placed the parchment on the desk near the window and unfolded it. His eyes widened as he did. The ink had aged to a mix of brown and black, but there was no mistaking the contents. A map of the continent sprawled across the space. He could tell by the depicted topography that it was at least several generations old. The details were sparse in areas. Despite that, it provided more than enough to identify major points of interest. Upon further inspection, Walter saw the inscription had been added to the upper corner.
Oh, double crap.
Walter almost ripped the page, refolding it.
Tyler needs to see this.
Not bothering to change into fresh clothes, he stuffed the map into one of his large pockets. He looked around once more before exiting the room, forgetting to lock it. Taking the stairs two at a time, he burst into the inn's lobby at a trot, startling several people.
Ready for some breakfast?
Mr. Willis called over to the harried medic from behind the counter, but Walter shook his head.
No time.
He waved the thought aside.
I need to get to the main city right away.
He strode through the room and opened the door. He had to stop as Mr. Willis, the new proprietor, came around and put out a restraining hand.
Hold on a moment.
Mr. Willis exclaimed.
Surely it can wait until you've had a bite. Old Doc told me not to let you leave without something in your stomach. He's been watching you.
Walter ran an impatient hand over his short hair. He'd taken the opportunity to cut it a day or two ago.
Don't have time for that. I need to speak to Tyler right now. It's urgent.
Mr. Willis withdrew his hand. He took in the lively expression despite the lines on the veteran's face.
Let me arrange a ride.
He offered.
I'll ask one of the mages to request a dragon. Faster than trekking by foot. In the meantime, get something to eat.
Walter's shoulders relaxed as he saw the wisdom in the request.
All right.
He agreed.
But please, convey the urgency of the matter.
At Mr. Willis's nod, Walter changed course and headed for the dining room. He was a bit hungry. It wouldn't hurt to eat something while he waited. Tyler paced the vast corridors. Due to Anwen's recent vision, preparations took on a greater energy. If what she'd seen was true, they had a lot to do before the Revenants attacked, and they were nowhere near ready. With their reduced numbers, making a frontal assault was out of the question. They would have to maintain a defense tact. With half the mages either dead or wounded, that further reduced their numbers. It also felt as though this had all been planned. At least Anwen seemed none the worse for her second overexposure to the Diviner's Sage. Perhaps it was because of their shared draconic soul, or maybe because she was made of sterner stuff than anyone wanted to admit, including himself. The truth of the matter remained. The sacred herb had done something to the Kaida. Her soul sight had increased, and something else along with it, though Tyler couldn't put a finger on what.
Demon,
Callum called out as he moved towards his brother. Silver-green scales scraped against the floor as he walked. He couldn't help but feel a sense of relief to see his kin back in his original form. He found it more than disconcerting that his brother seemed to prefer the mortal form. Tyler paused as the other dragon approached.
what is it?
He had not wanted to be disturbed, but with everything going on, he supposed it was impossible to find a place where he could be alone. Callum's expression was vague as he joined his brother.
The Nurrim requests we convene the council. Your mortal friend has just arrived and requests an urgent meeting.
Hearing his friend mentioned, Tyler couldn't help but look up sharply. Chances were good he didn't mean Courtney, who was still with Anwen. There was only one other person he could be referring to.
Walter?
Callum gave a nod.
Though why he should claim the attention of the council is beyond even my comprehension. He must have brought something of great importance to the Nurrim to warrant such a gathering.
Tyler could only shake his head. What had the veteran found that would require such actions? He had no idea.
Do you know what?
The older dragon shook his head.
Come and find out.
He replied, then turned on his tail to return to the inner city. Tyler moved to follow after his brother. He skirted the bustling activity of mortals and other dragons all around him. Whatever Walter had uncovered, as his brother said, had to be big news. He just hoped it wasn't more bad news. Walter took a deep breath to settle his nerves. Despite having seen the dragons in full form before, he still found them a little intimidating. It was even more so to have a dozen of them staring at him with their unblinking eyes. Clearing his throat, he spread the map on the central table and stepped back.
And this is the map you found?
Kern asked as he peered intently at the aged parchment. It did indeed look old. The details hinted at something over 100 years. But that didn't mean the message attached was from the same period as its creation. The veteran nodded.
Just like I said.
He put the broken jewelry box down next to the yellowed page.
I found it inside this box when I sort of, knocked it off my nightstand.
Tyler blinked as he caught the faint hint of Anwen's perfume coming from the case.
Where did you get that?
He pointed one claw at the wooden box in disbelief. The relic hadn't been among her things when he'd taken them from the Dritty Inn, back before they'd opened the mountain. How had it come into Walter's possession? Childlike laughter echoed in Walter's head as he glanced at the box.
I'm really not sure.
He confessed.
There was a little girl, maybe, 3 or 4 years old, said her name was Emmy. She gave me the box.
Tyler pulled back in surprise.
Again?
He said to himself. The image of the sprightly girl entered his head. Her red hair was almost as brilliant as Kaida Magus's long tresses. Why had she gone to Walter with the box instead of him? Kern turned to his second-in-command.
Do you know this child?
The younger dragon lord turned to the Nurrim.
I've seen her several times now. I feel certain Anwen has as well.
He confessed.
As to the child's origins, I do not know where she came from or why she's here.
The Nurrim sighed.
More riddles.
His white scales shone in the mage light.
What does the inscription say?
He asked as he turned back to Walter and the parchment. Walter moved the map and leaned over it to get a better view. He had to squint to read the writing.
Where have the mages gone? They follow the walker. Divided to protect their future, they now wander. The Kaida has gone. Clues to follow. Find the lost mages and bring them home. The Kaida will know where to go.
The rumble of draconic voices filled the air as several of the council spoke all at once.
Order!
Callum called for order, and the voices subsided as his voice echoed around the chamber.
Where have the mages gone? Rubbish.
An aged brown one called out.
They've been here the whole time?
Who is the walker?
Another called out. Tyler leaned back in his seat.
It can't be,
He said in awe as realization struck. It didn't surprise him that the others didn't know. Kern turned to the silver-blue dragon.
Speak your piece, Damon.
He commanded in a quiet voice. The others turned to look at the dragon lord. With a nod, Tyler moved to his haunches.
During your long slumber, many things happened. Most have been explained. But until this map was found,
He indicated the parchment with a nod of his head.
I did not recall another event of note.
There was a momentary bustle of noise that quickly subsided. Tyler blinked, feeling the presence of Anwen as she entered the room. He gave a brief nod towards her in acknowledgement.
Several years after the mountain was sealed,
He continued.
the divide between the mage circle and the others became an impassable subject. When their differences threatened to tear them apart, Kaida Emma chose to divide the mages. Against my counsel, the Kaida secreted away with her followers in the dead of night, and nothing had been heard from them until Anwen Porter returned to the mountain.
All eyes turned to Anwen at Tyler's comment. She resisted the urge to squirm. Thoughts of what had happened last time she'd come to the council meeting filled her head. She wasn't about to have a repeat performance.
Kaida,
Kern acknowledged her.
do you have any memory of your mother mentioning these other mages?
Anwen shook her head. Her mother had hidden those earlier memories from her mind, but she didn't think that would help much, so she didn't say anything. Margo probably never mentioned it anyway, or hadn't known. Kern lowered his head.
I had hoped. But I am not surprised. Margo was nothing if not thorough when following my instructions.
It was not something she'd told him either. The Kaida fidgeted, twisting the ring on her finger. Something niggled at the back of her mind. Someone, another Kaida perhaps, had told her. What was it? Something about the mage ring. Still rubbing at the stone with one finger, Anwen thought of her mother.
You can always call on me.
She remembered her saying. Green light glinted off the jewel. Anwen almost jumped as the form of a middle-aged woman appeared before her. For the briefest of moments, she thought she recognized the woman.
Mom? What are you doing here? I thought you were...
She trailed off, realizing she'd been mistaken. Emma Kaida Lucas raised a transparent hand to silence her great-granddaughter.
I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I am not your mother. However, I will answer your questions as best as I can. The others cannot see or hear me.
She added as she looked at her progeny.
You already seem aware that you can call upon the wisdom and memories of any of the past Kaidas. It is your right. What would you learn of us?
Anwen's eyes lit up as she remembered what Courtney had told her only hours before. She'd been right. And though this woman was not her mother, she couldn't help but feel a sort of kinship with her.
What can you tell me about the other mages? Those who left the village with you?
Emma seemed to fade momentarily.
It was for their protection. I separated from the others, those who did not follow the traditions of the true mage. They moved ahead, led by the Walker, a woman I charged with their leadership. They were charged to remain hidden until a future Kaida could return and lead them back to the mountain. I went another way with my family, to protect both of our respective groups.
Walter watched as Anwen seemed to be holding a conversation with herself. He'd noticed all eyes had turned towards her. He couldn't help but wonder if the strain of everything had finally made her snap.
Who's she talking to? Her mom's dead, right?
Tyler hushed him.
She's communing with the past Kaidas, which includes her mother.
He wished he could listen in on the conversation, but apparently his connection with her didn't include conversations with previous incarnations. Anwen remained silent for some time. She occasionally nodded as if agreeing to or acknowledging something.
I'll tell them,
she said as she straightened. Making eye contact with Tyler, she gave a faint smile.
I have the first clue.
They exist. This separate group of mages.
Callum curled his lip in disbelief. His tail wrapped around his belly as if to draw it into himself. The Kaida nodded.
My great-grandmother, Emma Lucas, just told me of a group who followed the Walker. She was a fellow mage who led them to a safe location to wait until the mountain was reopened.
We should send a party to investigate.
One dragon called out from near the back of the chamber.
If we can find them, we can add their strength to our own.
Another stood to full height.
This may prove to be the turning point. Our secret weapon against the Revenants.
Callum reared up as well, eyes flashing.
If they have not all died off,
he countered.
Who is to say they survived all these years?
Walter shook his head.
I can't believe this.
He threw his hands up in the air.
Listen, as a former reserve officer, I was taught to explore every option. If you're unwilling to go look, then I will, with or without help. Stop being such cowards and do something. I doubt that little girl gave me that map so you could all just bicker about it.
Kern held out one clawed hand.
Peace. No one has said we will not go. But since you volunteer, I will not stop you. To be precise, I agree that we should look into this further. But we cannot afford to send a large party. There are too many things that need to be done here.
Tyler nodded in agreement.
Speed is of the essence, so a small party makes sense. I volunteer as well.
He gave Walter a comradely smile. Before any other comments could be made, Anwen stepped forward as well. All eyes turned her way as she spoke.
I'm going too.
The dragons murmured at this announcement. Several turned to the Nurrim while the others argued for or against the idea.
The Kaida should not leave the mountain.
One declared.
We will need it here.
Anwen clenched her fists as anger welled up in her.
I'm going and none of you can stop me.
The heat of her words quelled the rising tide of voices.
Besides, the lost mages will only return if the Kaida comes for them. I have to go.
Tyler turned a wry eye to Kern.
She has a point. I can train her more in the ways of a mage while we search. You know her reasoning is sound.
Kern glanced at Anwen, noting the firm set of her jaw, her rigid stance. Tyler was right. She was changing.
Who will lead the mages here in your absence? We cannot leave them without guidance, and not all will listen to a dragon. Be it one of the council or no.
Anwen's muscles went slack at the reminder of her birthright. She looked around frantically, trying to think of someone. She hadn't anticipated this turn of events any more than she had the sudden quest. She was no leader and yet was still forced to act like one. Their expectations were more than enough to drive her mad.
Courtney can.
Tyler spoke up.
Though she's not as skilled as some, her abilities will allow for it. And if she has a dragon lord at her side, none will question her authority.
Anwen sent him a grateful look. Courtney was more suited to this role than she was. It made perfect sense for her to take charge. The white dragon nodded in thought, bringing one clawed hand to his feathered chin.
Yes, that would be acceptable. The personal friend of the Kaida, and a Dragon Lord. I agree to this course of action.
Callum's jaw dropped open.
But my Lord Nurrim, who will stand by her side? We all have many duties to prepare for the oncoming storm.
You will,
Kern said, cutting him off with one wave of his clawed hand. The silver-green dragon almost backed into the wall as he realized what Kern had said.
Surely not, my lord,
he protested. While he didn't exactly loathe the girl, it would go against his beliefs to partner with her. It didn't matter that it was only for political reasons. The Nurrim nodded.
I know of your sentiment regarding mortals, especially those with mage blood in their veins. Regardless, I feel you are the most fitting for the role.
His tone brooked no arguments. Sensing the Elder's will, Callum bowed.
As you deem, Nurrim.
Kern turned to Anwen and Walter.
On the morrow, you will set out to find the Walker and the other mages. Do not take too long. If you have not found them in 1 week's time, return immediately so we may prepare for battle. I know the Revenants will not wait for long.
Walter nodded as Anwen swallowed the lump in her throat. She glanced at Tyler, who nodded subtly.
All will be well,
he told her.
We will look out for each other.
Go and prepare,
Kern commanded.
Have Courtney Willis summoned, that we may inform her of her new duties.
One of the smaller dragons ran off to do his bidding.